Hey, what's up, guys? Timmy here. Coming to bring you a quick Hydra guide. So we're going to have the Hydra clan tournament released in the next 1 to 2 weeks, which every week it's going to put you in a bracket, I believe, of 5 other clans, and you have a chance to win stone skin accessories depending on how you do on each level versus those other 5 clans. So we already do pretty well on the normal Hydra here. We could get some more people doing bigger numbers on hard. Not that we have to kill it, but at least to try to have some competitive numbers. So firstly, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go through the boss guide, and we're just gonna read it together because that's where you're gonna get the best information here. So we'll start at the top with the Head of Decay. The biggest skill that the Head of Decay has is his Speed of Decay, which removes all debuffs from all of the heads and then gives them turn meter. So this is going to remove your HP burns, your block buffs, your decreased defense, decreased attack, decreased speed, all those important debuffs. So here with the Rotten Ward, he removes all debuffs from the head with the lowest HP and then gives him a life barrier. That's that 4-turn buff that you see randomly. It's usually a pretty strong, or 4-turn shield. I mean, it's usually a very strong shield. It is protected, and it takes a while if you don't have strong champs to break through. So this is pretty much just his A1. He'll just attack the person with the lowest HP and put a heal reduction. And when the head is decapitated, it heals all the champions by 30% of their max HP and then restores 50% of their max HP. Each head has a different buff when they're decapitated. That buffs your team. So whenever a champion is healed, it destroys their max HP. This used to be bugged. It wasn't destroying enough HP. And then they hotfixed it, so where it was destroying the correct amount of max HP, and then it made the content way too hard. So they reworked it back to where it's destroy up to 15% of your max HP. So pretty much you can bring in Miracle Heal or Marichka to clear that, but 15% isn't that much. You should be able to just kind of ignore this. For the rest of the Head of Decay's kit, you're going to want decreased speed, which is going to help you with a couple of the other heads too. And then the biggest thing for the Head of Decay is bring in Provoke. So keeping the Head of Decay provoked so that it can't cleanse all the other heads and fill their tumor meter. This is if the Head of Decay is on starting lineup, you're going to want a Provoke champion. Okay, the Head of Blight. The Head of Blight is one of the weaker heads as far as I'm concerned. This is A1, where it attacks all the enemies and will place poison, so you're just going to need a cleanse to keep the poisons off of you. Now, when you kill the head, it inflicts damage to all other heads that are under HP burn. Pretty much just another AoE poison, and instant activate on the poison, and then the poison cloud. So this is difficult to deal with. You're gonna want block buffs, a champion that brings block buffs, and then you can't place the poison cloud. The only other way to really avoid the poison cloud is to bring in champions that can place their debuffs through the poison cloud. Tunisia is the first one that comes to mind. There aren't that many, but if you do have one, it'll make the Hydra a lot easier for you when the Head of Blight is in the starting lineup. Okay, Head of Mischief. This is one that gives, I think, newer players the most trouble. There you just have Thieving Jaws. This is where it will attack the champion that has the most buffs on your team. So if everybody has 3 buffs and one person has 4 buffs, it's going to attack and attempt to steal all the buffs from that champion. It does require accuracy for him to steal the buffs from your champion. And then when the buffs are stolen, it will spread all of the buffs that it just stole from you onto all of the heads. So the biggest ways to counter this are a block buff champion, so Ugo or Mighty Ugo, because if Head of Mischief has block buffs on itself and it goes to steal your buffs, it will strip your buffs from you, but it won't obtain the buffs. So that is one way to deal with it. The best way to deal with it is to have a designated resistance tank. That's a champion that will always have more buffs than the rest of your champions because they give themselves buffs. And then you give them a high resistance number to counter the accuracy for the head. If the Head of Mischief is in the starting lineup, you should absolutely have 3 Mischief tanks built for Hydra. If the Head of Mischief is not in the starting lineup, you do not need a resistance tank for that rotation. Okay, the Head of Wrath. So this is pretty much just the big AoE nuke head. There's not a ton that you can do to kind of protect yourself other than shields, ally protection, strengthen, decrease attack on the head, and making sure that you don't have increased attack on your team that gets stolen by Mischief and then spread onto Wrath, because Wrath does a lot of damage. And it'll also provoke you, so you're going to want a cleanser in the team. Having at least one champion with a decent resistance number that can cleanse your whole team is very helpful for a lot of these heads. A lot of them have different buffs. But yeah, really, Wrath is just, don't let it get increased attack or it will kill your whole team. Head of Torment is probably the second most difficult for newer players to deal with. But just like Mischief, once you figure it out, it actually becomes one of the easiest heads to deal with. So, the Spectral Jaws, it gives the head a 50% chance of placing a fear debuff for 2 turns. And it cannot be blocked or resisted. And then it will attack all of the champions who are under fear. So the biggest ways to counter the Head of Torment, I guess Perfect Veil is going to be would be one of the best ways, but there's only 2 champions in the game that have Perfect Veil, and that's Duchess and Rector Drath. And then the best way would be to bring in Inquisitor Shamail. So Inquisitor Shamail does have this passive skill. Whenever an ally receives a fear or true fear debuff, this skill will instantly remove the debuff and fill the ally's turn meter by 15%. So, and there's no cooldown on this. So if you have Inquisitor Shamail in your team, Head of Torment will never place any fears or true fears, and it will also boost one of your allies' turn meters. So if you don't have Inquisitor Shamail, you're going to want somebody like a Pythion or a Wither the Crown, somebody who can remove these fears. And if you do have a higher resistance number, then the head has accuracy for whatever difficulty you're fighting it on. Then your cleanser will never get the fear, and it can keep the fears off the rest of your team. And another interesting thing with the Head of Torment and Inquisitor Shamail is the way that Inquisitor Shamail's passive red is that it gives the ally that it cleanse the turn meter, but the way it works in Hydra is whoever is in your leading spot gets turn meter whenever Inquisitor uses his passive to remove fear. So I have Geomancer in my top spot for this team, which means Geomancer is just going to get a lot of turn meter increase as well as his 260 speed. He's already pretty fast, and that's going to get him around to doing his quicksand grasp a lot more, which is going to keep his passive up. Okay, moving on from the Head of Torment, we have the Head of Suffering. So the Head of Suffering is the one that puts the Ally Protect on all of the other heads. An interesting thing about the Head of Suffering is it uses its skills more than any other head. Some of the other heads will use their A1s even if their skills are off cooldown. But the Head of Suffering will always use his skills if they're off cooldown. Which means the Head of Suffering is a great option to use Brimstone, because Brimstone activates whenever they use a skill. It doesn't activate off their A1. And really, the best ways to counter the Head of Suffering is just a lot of damage. You can poison the Head of Suffering, and using block buffs so that it can't put its ally protect on the rest of its team, and the reflect damage on itself. That's going to be a great option as well. Alright, so there was a quick explanation. We went through the boss guide for the different heads. So as you heard me say, a lot of the heads have some counters that are the same, like block debuffs is really good. It affects almost all of the heads. And provoke is really good if the Head of Decay is up to keep your team from being cleansed, but if the Head of Decay is not up, the provoke's not as good. So there is a cool tool I just linked in our Discord. It's made by Nubraids. So here, this is Nubraid's tool. It's his Hydra cheat sheet. Here, he has different debuffs, buffs, and utility, and how he kind of ranks them. I never thought of Brimstone as an S tier debuff in Hydra, and then he does have a little video explaining that it's really good against Suffering, so I guess you can use Brimstone. Block buffs is going to be the most important debuff for all the heads across all the rotations. So in here, he has all the heads listed and the best ways to counter each head. So when the rotations change, you can come in here and kind of pick which champions you think that you're going to need for your fight. Again, if Head of Decay is not starting, you do not need to bring a Provoke champion. It's not going to help you as much. But as you can see, he's recommending block buffs for 4 out of the 6 heads, so you should have 3, if you can, if you have the champions, 3 block buff champions for each of your Hydra teams. Show you some block buff champions that are good for Hydra. There's really not that many, but they're all pretty accessible. Mighty Uko is going to be great because he brings you decreased attack, which is great for the damage on the heads. He brings you decreased accuracy and block buffs, as well as some other utility here. The most popular one used by all players is going to be Mighty Ugo, or Ugo, I mean, not Mighty Ugo, just Ugo. So I have 3 Ugos. Ugo 2, another one somewhere. Here she is. So the stats on my Ugos are pretty similar. I just try to have them at really high speed and tanky stats, just so that she can rotate through with her block buffs. There's one here. One here. Actually, I think my 3rd is still being built. And then one that a lot of people forget about, who's also really good for Hydra, is Umbral Enchantress. block buffs on the A2 on a 3-turn cooldown. She is an epic Void, but I ended up having a lot of her, so she is definitely worth building for Hydra. Alright, so that's going to be the end of this video. I am going to make another quick video about how to build a resistance tank, and some other tips and tricks for the Hydra.